You know that tax refund you're expecting? That nice little chunk of change you get every year? Have you ever thought of it as more than just a bonus, but as a real, actual asset you could use right now? Well, today we're diving into a protocol that does exactly that. It's all about turning a future promise into cash in your hand today.
I mean, it's a huge question, right? So many of us build our budgets around that expected money, but it's always locked away, stuck on the IRS's timeline. This whole explainer is about finding a way to skip the waiting game, how to turn that future IOU from the government into immediate, usable cash. And this is how it's done. It's called the Tax Refund Collateral Protocol. You can think of it as a bridge connecting the dots between old school tax law and cutting-edge financial tech. The goal is super simple. Transform your expected refund into a secure, verifiable piece of collateral.
So, what's the magic trick here? Well, it all comes down to one word: collateralization. All it really means is that you're using something you own in the future, in this case, a payment that the government owes you, to get financing today. This protocol just provides the legal and the tech framework to make sure it all happens safely and securely. Okay, I know what you're thinking. Turning a government promise into a real financial instrument sounds complicated, but the protocol actually breaks it all down into a super clear step-by-step path. So let's walk through exactly how it works, from the initial legal paperwork all the way to getting the cash. Here's the roadmap for the journey. The whole thing is built on four main pillars. First, you lay the legal foundation. Second, you protect that foundation out in the open. Third, you make sure the government is in the loop. And finally, you let technology handle the payout automatically. Let's dig into each one. All right, step one is the Smart Security Agreement. This is the bedrock of the whole process. It's the legal document that officially says, hey, my future tax refunds for, say, 2023, 2024, and 2025 are being used as collateral. And here's the cool part. By recording it on the blockchain, that agreement becomes permanent. It's set in stone, and no one can ever change it.
So a private agreement is great, but how do you protect your claim in the real world? That is where the UCC1 filing comes in. This is a standard move in the financial world. Think of it like planting a flag. It's a public notice that tells everyone else this asset, this tax refund is already spoken for. It legally secures your spot at the front of the line.
Now, for any of this to work, you have to play by the IRS's rules. That's where two very specific forms come in. First is Form 2848, which is a power of attorney. This just gives a designated person permission to talk to the IRS for you, to verify things are moving along. Then you have Form 8302. This one registers them as an electronic return originator, which is basically the official key to the IRS's secure digital system. Together, these forms create a legitimate, authorized channel of communication. And finally, the payoff. The money for the deal is held in what's called a multi-signature escrow. Fancy term, but it just means it's a digital safe that requires multiple keys to open. No one person can just run off with the funds. The release is controlled by a smart contract that only unlocks the money when all the rules are met, like confirming the UCC1 is filed and the IRS forms are approved. It's all automated, totally transparent, and you don't have to trust anyone, just the code. Okay, we're talking about legal filings, blockchain, smart contracts. So the big question, how do you know you can trust any of this? Well, the protocol security is really built on two powerful pillars: the authority of old school law and the certainty of brand new technology. Let's see how they work together. This is where it gets really clever. On one side, you have a civil law notary. Now, this is not the person at the bank who just watches you sign something. A civil law notary actually verifies the content of the documents, giving them a much stronger legal standing, especially across different countries. Then on the other side, you have the notary chain blockchain, which creates a permanent, unfakeable digital receipt of that notarization. So you get the power of human legal authority backed by bulletproof digital verification. It's the best of both worlds. And of course, your personal information has to be kept safe through all of this. Every single document, from that first agreement to your IRS forms, is locked down with AES 256 encryption. To put that in perspective, this is the same standard used by governments to protect top-secret information. So yeah, your data is secure. So let's take a step back and look at the big picture. What does this all really mean? This whole system is way more than just a trick to get your tax refund a little early. It actually starts to change the way we think about what an asset even is. There's a quote from the source material that just nails it perfectly. It says, this process transforms static legal claims into global investment assets, connecting courts to capital markets.
You're taking something that was just a piece of paper, a claim stuck in the legal system, and turning it into a dynamic financial tool that can be used anywhere in the world. But if there's one thing you take away from all of this, let it be this. You are turning a future promise from the government into a real, tangible financial instrument that you can hold and use today. It's about unlocking the value of money that is already yours. It's just been stuck behind red tape. This protocol is the key to that lock. And that leaves us with a pretty wild final thought. If we can make a tax refund a liquid asset, what's next? Your future paychecks? The sales commissions you know you're going to earn next quarter? Once you can securely tokenize any predictable future income, the possibilities are just mind-boggling to think about. Thanks for tuning into this explainer.
Smash that like button and that subscribe button. You see me working hard for the money over here. Subscribe for more exclusive content.
You know, for centuries, alchemists dreamed of turning lead into gold. Well, today we're going to talk about a new kind of alchemy, one that's actually real, turning physical gold into liquid, spendable, digital capital. It's this amazing blend of centuries-old law and brand new technology that's unlocking value that's been, well, just sitting in vaults for years.
So let's just start with this question. What if you could take a gold bar, something solid, heavy, and locked away, and use it to buy a house, just like you'd use cash? I mean, no banks, no wire transfers, just a direct, secure digital transaction. That's the core idea we're going to unpack today. How to take this immense static value and make it completely fluid.
All right, so here's the game plan. First, we'll look at the real-world asset. Then we'll see how it's turned into a digital token. After that, we'll dive into the tech and law that keep it all secure. And finally, we'll see how it's actually put to work to fund something huge, like a real estate deal. Let's get started.
Okay, Section 1, the new asset frontier. Look, before you can digitize anything, you need a real, tangible, verifiable asset. We're talking about finding the hidden financial potential in the physical world around us. And for our story, it all starts right here. Our starting point is this thing called a goldback. And that quote you see on screen, that's not just some marketing slogan. That's a legally binding statement from a registry officer. It's a guarantee that for every single digital unit that exists, there is a specific audited piece of real gold sitting in a vault. This one-to-one physical backing, that's the absolute bedrock of all the trust that gets built on top.
So, we've got the physical gold. It's verified, it's in the vault. Now what? How do we actually get it onto the internet so we can use it? This next step is the crucial bridge from the physical world to the digital one. This is where the magic, the alchemy, really begins. And that bridge is built using a process called tokenization. Essentially, we're taking the ownership rights to that physical gold and encoding them into a unique digital token that lives on a blockchain. And just like that, a heavy, immobile gold bar becomes weightless, you can divide it into tiny fractions, and you can send it anywhere in the world instantly. But here's the thing. For this to work in serious finance, you need stability. You can't have its value jumping all over the place like some cryptocurrencies. That's where specific frameworks come in. They create a gold token whose value is permanently locked to the real gold held in a legally separate trust. This means its value isn't based on market hype. It's based on actual physical metal. And that gives you predictability and, most importantly, confidence.
Okay, so we've created a digital twin of our gold. Now it needs a place to live, a digital vault, if you will. This is the technology layer that securely stores, manages, and protects these assets, making the whole system work at a massive scale.
And listen, this is not some small-time experiment. The platforms that make up this digital vault ecosystem, they are already managing over $269 million in assets. This just goes to show you that the market is already placing some serious trust in this technology. This is real. Now, under the hood, this digital vault is running on 3 core engines. First, you've got the Token Asset API. Think of it like the robotic arm inside the vault. It creates, moves, and keeps track of every single token. Then there's the Compliance API. That's the security guard at the front door, automatically running background checks on everyone to make sure they're following the rules. And finally, the Contract API. That's like the vault's built-in lawyer, creating legally binding contracts that actually execute themselves. But you know what? Slick technology is not enough, not when you're talking about institutional money. They need something more. They need a rock-solid legal framework that guarantees everything is trustworthy and enforceable in a court of law. And this is where old-school law meets new-school tech. At the very heart of this legal trust is an individual called a civil law notary.
Now, don't confuse this with the person who just stamps your car title at the local bank. These are highly trained legal officers. When they authenticate a digital transaction, they give it the full force of law, making it binding and enforceable in courts all over the world. They're the human bridge between a line of code and a legal verdict.
So, how does a lender officially say, hey, that digital gold is my collateral? Well, they use a classic, time-tested legal tool, the UCC1 filing. It's basically like planting a legal flag on the asset that tells the entire world, this belongs to me if the borrower defaults. It's a public notice. And without this simple step, no serious lender would ever get involved.
And finally, the compliance rules get baked directly into the token itself, using standards like ERC 3643. Think of it like a digital passport. The token is programmed so it can only be held or transferred by digital wallets that have been pre-verified and meet all the necessary legal checks. This automates regulation right at the asset level, which is a total game changer.
All right, so we have our gold. It's physically backed, it's legally sound, and it's compliant by design. Now for the exciting part. Let's actually use it to buy that house, or better yet, fund the entire housing development. This is where we see how this entire system unlocks brand new streams of capital.
Now, check this out. There are new kinds of capital programs emerging, and their most revolutionary feature is incredibly simple. They can provide huge amounts of institutional money for a project, but the person with the idea, the applicant, doesn't have to put up any of their own collateral. Let that sink in for a second.
Just look at the difference here. In traditional lending, you, the borrower, have to put up your house, your assets, and you carry all the personal risk. But in this new model, some qualified third party provides the collateral, and the loan is what's called non-recourse. That means if the project fails, the lender can't come after your personal stuff. The risk is completely decoupled from the innovator. This one shift could unlock capital for so many brilliant projects that were just considered too risky before. So, let's connect all the dots. Imagine a developer needs $10 million to build a new apartment complex. Under a program like this, a third party agrees to provide $23.5 million in collateral. And what is that high-quality, liquid, legally secure collateral? You guessed it. It's our tokenized gold. The developer gets their funding to build, and the lender is fully protected by a verifiable digital asset that's backed by physical gold. The loop is complete.
So, what does all this mean? This fusion of physical assets, modern tech, and rock-solid legal frameworks, what does it mean for the future of finance? Well, for one, this model isn't just for one specific type of loan. The core technology, this system that uses notaries to legally settle smart contracts, sometimes called a notary chain, it's incredibly versatile. As you can see, it's already being used to power a whole range of financial activities, everything from escrow and insurance to trade finance. This isn't a one-trick pony. It's a whole new kind of financial infrastructure. So let's just quickly recap the whole journey. We saw how real, physical assets like gold can be securely turned into digital tokens. We learned that real trust comes from combining that cool tech with established legal frameworks like the UCC. And we saw how this enables powerful new ways to fund things, like non-recourse capital, ultimately making funding more accessible and secure for everyone.
And that kind of leaves us with one last big thought to chew on. If anything of value, gold, real estate, a piece of art, maybe even your future income, can be turned into a secure, verifiable, and instantly transferable digital token, how does that change our very definition of ownership? What does it even mean to own something in a world where value itself is becoming truly, instantly liquid?
Smash that like button and that subscribe button. You see me working hard for the money over here. Subscribe for more exclusive content.
You know, whether you're just buying a coffee or you're watching a multi-billion-dollar merger on the news, our entire financial world is built on this invisible foundation. It's an architecture we lean on every single day, and most of the time, we don't even see it. So let's go ahead and map out that hidden structure together.
So, what is it, really? When you look past all the numbers flashing on a screen or the logos on our credit cards, what's truly holding the whole thing together? I'll tell you, it's not just about money, it's something way, way more fundamental.
It turns out the entire system rests on just 3 core pillars. That's it: trust, risk, and rules. You can think of them as the foundation, the support beams, and the building code for, well, everything financial. And understanding how they all connect, that's the real key to understanding how our modern world actually works.
Okay, let's start with the first pillar. And you could argue it's the most important one: trust. I mean, think about it. Long before we had cash, we had trust. It's the original currency that lets us exchange value with complete strangers. And it takes all kinds of forms, from ancient legal promises to the raw power of a modern reputation.
You know, when the law talks about a trust, it's not just talking about a warm, fuzzy feeling. No, it's a super powerful and very precise legal tool. It lets someone, they're called a trustee, hold assets for the benefit of someone else. But for this thing to be legally binding, there can be absolutely zero ambiguity.
And that clarity, it all comes down to what lawyers call the three certainties. First, was a trust actually intended? Like, for real? Second, what exactly is the property we're talking about? And third, who is supposed to benefit from this? You have to be able to identify them. If you're missing even one of those, the whole legal structure just falls apart. In this world, precision is absolutely everything.
But trust isn't just locked up in some dusty legal document. Oh no. In the high-stakes world of central banking, a reputation is their most powerful weapon. When a central banker gets up and says they're going to keep inflation low, the market has to believe them. That reputation for hating inflation actually becomes a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, stabilizing an entire economy based on the power of their word alone.
30%. Get this, that's the power of trust converted directly into cold hard cash. In the world of private equity, a buyer with a stellar reputation, someone who's known for being a great partner, can actually negotiate up to a 30% discount when they buy a company. So why would anyone do that? Well, it's because the seller trusts them to be a better steward of the business even more than a higher bidder they don't know or don't trust. It's incredible.
Okay, so if trust is the currency, our second pillar, risk, is the constant, buzzing calculation that's happening behind every single transaction, every investment, every loan. At the end of the day, it's all a bet on the future, and someone is always trying to manage the odds.
And one of the biggest, most slippery dangers in finance is something called moral hazard. This is a really toxic situation where one person gets to enjoy all the upside of a risky bet, but if it all goes wrong, somebody else gets stuck with the bill. It basically creates this powerful, dangerous incentive to be reckless.
The classic example here is banking. Think about it. If a bank makes a bunch of risky loans and they pay off, the owners get rich. But if those loans fail, well, government deposit insurance often means that we, the taxpayers, are on the hook. This can lead to a really desperate strategy with a wild name: gambling for resurrection. It's where a failing bank starts taking massive risks, just hoping for a miracle, because hey, they've got nothing left to lose. Now, another really critical type of risk revolves around this idea of liquidity. The best way to think of liquidity is like the oil in the financial engine. An asset is liquid if you can sell it for cash quickly without taking a big hit on the price. Cash itself, perfectly liquid. A historic mansion, yeah, that's very illiquid. You absolutely need that oil to keep the whole machine running smoothly.
Because when that oil runs out, the engine seizes up, and it happens fast. A liquidity crisis is this terrifying cascade. It starts with just a simple loss of confidence. Lenders get nervous, and they turn off the taps of short-term money. Suddenly, the institution is forced into what's called a fire sale, just dumping assets at huge discounts. But that floods the market, which makes prices crash for everyone. And what started as a funding problem spirals into a full-blown solvency crisis. It's a domino effect.
Which, of course, brings us to our third pillar, rules. Rules are the framework that we build to try and manage that volatile relationship between trust and risk. And what's so fascinating is how these rules have evolved, from these really broad principles of fairness to now automated lines of computer code.
For hundreds of years, financial law wasn't about thousands of pages of dense regulations. It was built on something called equity. You can think of it as a kind of legal fairness override. It was this whole branch of law designed to deliver just outcomes when the rigid, black and white rules just didn't make any sense. And these ancient principles or maxims are still cited in courtrooms today, like this one: "He who comes to equity must come with clean hands." It basically means you can't go asking a court for a fair outcome if you've been behaving badly yourself. These aren't just historical quirks, they're literally the philosophical DNA of our financial rules. But now, we're in the middle of a radical shift. Instead of these broad principles being interpreted by a judge, the rules of finance are increasingly being hard-coded directly into the assets themselves. The enforcement is no longer up to a person, it's automatic. So take a modern digital asset. It's not just a token, it's a self-enforcing rulebook. The code itself can automatically check that only approved investors can hold it, which satisfies securities laws. It can have a built-in freeze function if a loan defaults.
It can even have the logic for international banking stability rules. I'm talking about things like Basel III, coded right in. The rule is the asset.
So what happens when we put all three of these pillars, trust, risk, and rules, together in this new digital world? How is this invisible architecture that we've been talking about changing right under our feet?
Well, the promise, if you look at almost every metric, is a radical improvement. I mean, settlement speeds that used to take weeks can now happen in hours. Opaque, private ledgers are becoming transparent shared records. And all those slow, manual processes are being replaced by automated smart contracts. It's a fundamental rewiring of the entire system. But here's the crucial point. Even in this brand new digital world, the same three pillars are holding everything up. The architecture hasn't gone away. It's just being rebuilt with totally new materials. Our trust is shifting from people and institutions to computer code. Risk is being managed by automated controls instead of manual checks, and the rules are being enforced instantly by smart contracts.
Which leaves us with a really critical question for the future. As we build this faster, more efficient, more automated system, are we actually making our invisible architecture stronger? Or are we creating a new kind of fragility, a new kind of brittleness, where a single bug in the code could bring the whole thing crashing down? That's something to think about.
Smash that like button and that subscribe button. You see me working hard for the money over here. Subscribe for more exclusive content.
So how do we agree on what something is worth? More importantly, how do we build systems that we can all trust to protect and exchange that value? For, centuries, the answer has been law, these really complex codes and contracts. But what happens when that operating system, let's call it OS 1.0, starts to show its age, and a new one, built from computer code, comes along to replace it? All right, let's dive into this whole evolution of trust, from ancient legal ideas all the way to the future of digital assets.
Here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll look at the legal foundations of ownership, the real bedrock of all this. Then, we'll see how finance took those ideas and just scaled them up into a global value engine. After that, we got to look at the cracks, when that system starts to break. From there, we'll explore how code is becoming the new contract. And finally, we'll peek into the future and ask what an asset is even going to mean.
So let's kick things off with the original operating system for value, the law itself. For thousands of years, this has been the foundation that lets us own things, make promises that stick, and build entire economies. It sounds like such a simple question, doesn't it? You probably think, well, I have a receipt, or the deed has my name on it, or, it's literally in my house. But legally, ownership is way more complex. It's like a whole bundle of rights. And for centuries, English private law has had this really elegant way of thinking about it.
See, our legal system makes this really crucial split. On one side, you've got rights in rem. Think of this as your right to a physical thing, like your car or your house. That right is attached to the object itself, no matter who's holding it. But on the other side, you have rights in personam. These are personal rights, basically promises. If your friend owes you $20, your right is against that person, not against a specific $20 bill. This one distinction is basically the foundation of all modern property and contract law.
And if you build on that foundation, you get one of the most powerful legal tools ever invented, the trust. Seriously, this concept is genius. It separates who legally owns something from who gets to enjoy it. You have a trustee who manages the asset, but they have this incredibly strict duty. It's called a fiduciary duty to only act in the best interests of someone else, the beneficiary. It's this bit of legal magic that makes everything from family estates to huge university endowments even possible.
Okay, so we've got these legal building blocks, but how did we scale them up for the whole world? Well, that brings us to our second operating system, finance. The financial world took these core ideas of trust and ownership and built this massive high-speed engine right on top of them, designed to pump value all around the globe.
And at its heart, the system is actually beautiful in its simplicity. You've got savers, people like you and me, who put money into a bank. The bank then acts as this trusted middleman, a financial intermediary, and it channels those funds over to investors. These are the people and companies who borrow that money to build things, invent stuff, and create economic growth. Now, to make this whole engine run smoothly, finance needed a way to figure out what a promise of future money is worth today. The answer is this core concept called present value. And the idea is really straightforward. A dollar today is worth more than a dollar tomorrow. Why? Because the dollar you have right now can be invested to earn a return. Simple as that.
So just how much less is a future dollar worth? Well, check this out. A promise to receive one single dollar But 20 years from now, assuming a pretty modest 4% interest rate, is only worth about 46 cents today. That's it. This one calculation is the key to pricing basically everything, from government bonds to tech stocks.
And using these principles, the system scales up to mind-boggling complexity. You get private equity firms using debt or leverage to buy up entire companies. You get university endowments that are managing money with a time horizon that is literally infinite, with the job of making that capital last for generations.
But, and this is a big but, like any complex operating system, this one has bugs. It has vulnerabilities that can cause the entire value engine to sputter or even crash and burn. One of the most dangerous bugs is completely psychological. A bank run is the perfect example of a self-fulfilling prophecy. A bank could be totally fine, completely healthy, but if enough people believe it's in trouble and they all rush to pull their money out, that belief creates the crisis. The fear itself breaks the whole system. And we all saw this play out on a global scale, right? The 2007 to 2009 crisis wasn't just one failure. No, it was a chain reaction, a domino effect. It started with bad mortgage loans, which led to the near collapse of huge investment banks, and it ended in this massive credit crunch, where lending, the absolute lifeblood of the economy, just completely froze.
So what's the root cause of so many of these bugs? Well, there's a core problem in economics called asymmetric information. It sounds fancy, but it just means one person in a deal knows more than the other person. This creates all sorts of problems, like adverse selection. The people who are most desperate for a loan are often the riskiest bets. And then there's moral hazard, which is the risk that once you get the loan, you might be tempted to do riskier things because, hey, it's not all your money on the line anymore. The system spends a ton of time and money just trying to fix this information gap.
Which brings us to the new operating system, one designed specifically to patch these cracks in the old one. This is the point where computer code starts to behave a lot like a legal contract. And you know what I'm talking about. Enter the blockchain. You can really think of this as OS 3.0 for trust. Instead of having to rely on human middlemen and lawyers interpreting things, it relies on cryptographic proof and automated execution. Trust is literally built into the code. Just think for a second about the weak points of the old system. Everything needs a person to manually check it. Records are on paper or in separate databases, which means they're vulnerable to mistakes or fraud. People miss deadlines, which can literally forfeit legal rights. And a lot of the time, the whole process is a total black box. Now, a blockchain-based system attacks every single one of those problems head-on. Instead of manual checks, you get automated monitoring for things like contract deadlines. Instead of paper, you get an unchangeable, tamper-proof digital ledger. This creates incredible legal certainty with a perfect audit trail, which drastically cuts down the risk of human error or fraud. And the key that unlocks all of this is something called tokenization. It's the process of creating a digital representative, a digital twin, for a real-world asset and putting it on the blockchain. So instead of trying to trade a heavy bar of gold, you can just instantly trade a token that proves you own that bar. Suddenly, illiquid assets can be divided up, made accessible, and transferred in a flash. Okay, so why does any of this matter? What's the big deal? Well, it matters because this brand new technological layer is starting to unlock completely new forms of value and totally new ways of managing ownership.
Let's look at a concrete example so this isn't so abstract. It's called pledged asset lending. Now, that's just a fancy term for getting a loan by using your assets as collateral. But doing it with tokenized assets on a blockchain completely changes the game.
And this is where the system becomes almost self-sustaining. Imagine your tokenized collateral isn't just sitting there collecting dust. It's actively generating a yield. A smart contract can then automatically take that yield and use it to pay the interest on your loan or even start paying down the loan itself. The entire process becomes transparent, automated, and just incredibly efficient.
And all of this brings us to one last big question. We've gone on this journey from property rights written in law to value priced by finance, all the way to ownership recorded in code. So, when any asset, from a skyscraper to a share in a lawsuit, can be broken into a million pieces and traded as a digital token, what does it even mean to own something anymore? That's the question this new operating system for trust is forcing all of us to answer.
Smash that like button and that subscribe button. You see me working hard for the money over here. Subscribe for more exclusive content.
Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're going to dive into something pretty amazing, a new ecosystem that's designed to completely transform how we handle big, complicated transactions. We're talking about making them faster, safer, and just fundamentally more trustworthy. Just think about it for a second. What if all the friction, the delays, and the doubt that you feel with high-value exchanges just disappeared? A world where your ownership is absolute and agreements actually enforce themselves. That's the big idea we're going to unpack today. So to really get a handle on this, let's actually start with the problem. Let's look at the troubles we faced right now using a scenario I think we can all relate to: buying a car. You think it's going to be a simple purchase, but the reality? Oh man, it's a total mess of paperwork, waiting on banks, and worrying about potential disputes down the line. This huge gap between what we expect and the slow, risky, frustrating reality is really the core of the problem. And, a huge part of this uncertainty comes from the very money we use. Fiat currency, the dollars in our bank accounts, isn't backed by anything physical. Its value is really based on faith in the government, which means things like inflation can chip away at its value, adding this extra layer of instability to a big purchase. And it's not just the money, right? It's the law, too. Traditional contracts can be incredibly rigid and hard to enforce. If something goes wrong with that car sale, the legal bar to prove the whole deal is fundamentally broken is just ridiculously high. This kind of ambiguity is exactly what leads to those long, super expensive court battles. Okay, so that's the mess, but what if we could just build something better from the ground up? This is where the solution comes in, and it's built on two really powerful pillars, what we're calling sound money and smart law. So our first pillar, this idea of sound money, starts with something stable, a rock. This number you're looking at, $9,280, that's the fixed, locked-in value for one gold-backed token, or GLDB. It doesn't go up and down. It's a solid foundation you can build a transaction on. So what exactly are these goldbacks? Well, think of them as a currency you can actually trust. Because each one has a fixed value, every transaction is protected with military-grade encryption, and all the transfers are recorded on a permanent, insured ledger. You get a medium of exchange that's actually reliable for big purchases. And that brings us to pillar number 2, smart law. This is where the Justice Fund Exchange, or JFE, and something called notary chain come into play. What this ecosystem does is turn old-school paper contracts into digital agreements that literally run themselves. They're built on a blockchain, which means they're permanent, tamper-proof, and they self-enforce. All right, so we've got the two main ingredients. Let's go back to our car purchase and see how this actually works in real life. Let's walk through it. It's basically a 4-step digital handshake, and it happens crazy fast. First, the car's paper title gets turned into a unique digital token. Then the buyer and seller hop on the JFA and lock in their terms. The buyer sends the goldbacks, and here's the magic. The smart contract instantly executes, and boom, the title token is transferred to the buyer. The whole thing is done. Okay, you might be wondering, is this all, legal? Absolutely. And here's why. That digital car title isn't just any token. It uses a specific standard called ERC 3643. The easiest way to think about it is as a smart token that has all the legal rules, like identity checks, built right into it. That means every single transaction is automatically compliant from the get-go. And this right here, this is the real game changer. The agreement enforces itself. There's this legal concept called discharge, which is just a fancy way of saying the deal is officially done and settled, while notary chain automates that. There's no room to argue later because the system itself provides undeniable proof that the deal is final. No more court battles. So the whole deal is done in, the blink of an eye. But the impact here is way bigger than just speed. Let's break down what this new level of proof and finality really means and what it unlocks. I mean, just look at this. It completely crushes the old timeline. A process that normally takes days or even weeks. Dealing with banks, lawyers, the DMV is all compressed into a matter of seconds. The payment is verified, the title is notarized on notary chain, ownership is updated, and even the buyer's credit report can be updated dynamically. It all happens almost instantly. And the record of this transaction, it's not just some digital receipt. It's what's called JFE proof of work. And it's basically ironclad proof. Because it's on a blockchain, it can't be changed, it can't be deleted, it can't be faked. It's legally binding, undeniable evidence that can be instantly checked by anyone who needs to, like a bank or credit agency. And this is where things get really interesting. Because this process doesn't just change the transaction, it actually changes the asset itself. The car's value has been repurposed. It's no longer just a thing that sits in your driveway and loses value. This really breaks it down. Your normal car is an illiquid asset. It's a pain to get cash out of its value, right? You have to go through appraisals and loan applications. But a tokenized car title is liquid. Because the ownership and value are instantly verifiable, the new owner could use it as collateral for a loan, like right away. It unlocks capital that was totally trapped before. So, when you take a step back and think about this beyond just one car, you start to see the shape of a whole new economic framework, one built on trust. The benefits just ripple outwards. For you and me, it means way less cost and risk. For businesses, it's a massive boost in efficiency and security. And for the whole economy, injecting this much liquidity and verifiable trust could make our markets way more dynamic and, frankly, more resilient. So think about it. If we can completely fix a process as messy and common as buying a car, what else could we fix? What about real estate deals that close in seconds, not months? Or transferring shares in a private company without mountains of paperwork? Or even licensing music or art seamlessly? The potential here is just enormous. At the end of the day, what we're talking about is a huge shift in thinking. We're moving away from a system that's mostly built on debt and vague contracts to one that's built on direct ownership and programmable certainty. The real change here isn't just about making things faster. It's about redefining what it truly means to own something.
Smash that like button and that subscribe button. You see me working hard for the money over here. Subscribe for more exclusive content.
Hey everyone, and welcome. So, what if I told you that you could take something like digital gold, turn it into a real-world heavy-duty truck, and then, get this, use that truck to unlock a massive tax break? I know, it sounds a little like a financial fairy tale, right? But today, we're going to break down exactly how this works, connecting the old-school stability of gold with some seriously modern business strategy. Let's dive in. So, right to the big question, can you really do this? And the answer, believe it or not, is a resounding yes. We're going to walk through step by step how a stable, gold-backed digital asset can become a major business purchase, unlocking one of the most powerful tax advantages out there. And you're going to see that while the idea feels super cutting edge, the actual process is way simpler than you'd probably think. All right, here's our game plan. First up, we'll get a feel for the new asset landscape we're all living in. Then, we'll get into the specifics of how gold gets transformed into these digital tokens. After that, we'll see how you bridge those two worlds to actually buy something real. And finally, the big payoff. We'll explore that incredible Section 179 tax advantage. Okay, so why do things like asset-backed digital tokens even exist in the first place? Well, to really get their appeal, we've got to do a quick rewind and look at how our money evolved, and specifically, how it moved away from being tied to a real physical thing like gold. Trust me, this history is the key to understanding everything that's happening now. Just look at this timeline. It shows how, piece by piece, the link between the US dollar and actual gold was just severed. For a long, long time, your paper money was basically a claim check for a piece of gold in a vault. But that started to change. First, the reserve requirements were lowered, then they were scrapped altogether. Until finally in 1971, the cord was cut completely. The dollar was officially on its own. And that brings us right to the system we have today, fiat money. You know, its value doesn't come from a vault full of gold bars. It comes from our collective belief and trust in the system. And while that offers a lot of flexibility, it also opened up a huge door for innovators to start asking, hey, what if we could bring that tangible link back into the picture? And that is exactly what's happening right now. We're seeing this whole new class of digital assets pop up. But look, forget the wild up and down price swings of most crypto you hear about. These are totally different. They're built from the ground up for one thing: stability. And they get that by being directly tied to real-world stuff. So here's a perfect example of what we're talking about: a goldback, or GLDB. The idea is actually pretty simple. Think of it like a digital title deed for a tiny piece of physical gold. Each digital unit isn't just some number on a screen. It represents a specific, documented fraction of an ounce of real, physical gold, held securely in a trust. It's kind of like a high-tech version of the old gold standard. So, how does this actually create stability in a world of volatility? Well, unlike assets that can swing wildly from day to day, this system is all about predictability. For instance, one GLDB is assigned a fixed value, in this case $9,280, and that value is maintained by a super strict ratio of digital tokens to physical gold, which makes it a really reliable tool for, actually buying things. And look, this stability isn't just based on a handshake and a promise. Oh no. It's built on layers and layers of verification. You've got a one-to-one backing with physical gold. You have rigorous daily audits. The gold itself is held in trust-owned structures and monitored 24/7 in high-security vaults. I mean, every single pillar here is designed to build trust and guarantee that this is the real deal. Okay, so you've got this super stable digital asset. Awesome, but let's be real. You can't just walk into a Ford dealership and slap it on the counter. They want dollars. So, how do you bridge that gap? This is where some really cool financial tech comes in to build that connection. And I've got to say, this bridge is literally everything. I mean, think about it. Without a seamless way to get in and out of traditional currency, these digital assets are basically stuck in their own little world. These payment systems are the translators. They're the essential piece of infrastructure that lets these two financial universes actually talk to each other. Now, the process itself is surprisingly simple for everybody. First, you and the dealer agree on and lock in a final price in good old US dollars. That's the most important step. Then the dealer just generates an invoice using a service like BitPay. You pay that invoice with your digital gold backs, and here's the magic part. The dealer never even has to touch the digital asset. They just get the exact dollar amount deposited right into their bank account. Clean and simple. So yeah, you can think of platforms like BitPay as a universal translator. They take the buyer's digital asset, they do all the complicated conversion work behind the scenes, and they hand the seller exactly what they want, familiar US dollars. From the business owner's point of view, it's totally seamless. They don't need to know a thing about digital assets to make the sale happen. All right, that's enough theory. We've talked about the asset, we've talked about the digital token, we've talked about the payment bridge. Now let's put it all together and actually buy something with it, a real-world, heavy-duty asset for our business. And this isn't just some hypothetical what-if scenario. Businesses are doing this right now, today. You've got forward-thinking car dealerships from Salt Lake City to Nampa, Idaho, that have already set up these exact payment systems. They're ready to go. This is a practical reality. Now, remember that critical step we mentioned, locking in the US dollar price? This is the absolute secret to getting businesses on board. By basing the entire transaction on the fair market value in dollars, the seller is completely protected from any price volatility. They know exactly how much cash is going to hit their bank account, and that's why they're so willing to accept these new forms of payment. But here's the thing. The journey doesn't end when you drive that new truck off the lot. In fact, you could argue one of the most powerful steps comes next. Now that your trust or your business owns this brand new asset, you can leverage a very specific, very powerful part of the U.S. tax code. Everybody, meet the Section 179 deduction. Here's what it does in plain English. It lets your business deduct the entire purchase price of a qualifying asset, like a big work truck, in the very same year you buy it. You don't have to spread that deduction out over 5 or 10 years. You get the full benefit right now. So, how big of an impact are we talking about here? Well, it can be absolutely massive. Just imagine a business that has $400,000 in taxable income. Then they go out and buy a qualifying truck for that same amount, $400,000. With Section 179, that purchase can potentially reduce their taxable income all the way down to zero. I mean, that is a complete game changer. And here it is, the bottom line in cold, hard cash. For a business that's in the 37% tax bracket, that $400,000 deduction translates to a direct tax savings of $148,000. That's nearly $150,000 that stays right there in the business, ready to be reinvested instead of getting sent off to the IRS. Now, of course, there are rules. This isn't some magic wand you can just wave. The deduction only works against active business income, you can't use it to create a business loss, and you absolutely must have the documentation to prove the asset is for business use. It's an incredibly powerful tool, but you've got to play by the book. So let's just put that entire journey together one last time. Step 1, you start with a stable gold-backed digital asset. Step 2, you use that payment processor as a bridge to convert it to dollars. Step 3, you make the purchase, getting a high-value asset for your business. And Step 4, the big payoff, you use Section 179 to deduct the full purchase price from your income, from digital gold to business gold. You know, this whole process really shows this powerful convergence of old and new. The ancient stability of gold, the incredible efficiency of digital tokens, and the established rules of the U.S. tax code all working together. It really leaves us with a fascinating question to chew on. As these lines between the digital and the physical continue to blur, what does true ownership actually look like in the future?
Smash that like button and that subscribe button. You see me working hard for the money over here. Subscribe for more exclusive content.